This question was sent in to us. When did you know you were called to be a priest? That's a good question, actually. I take this to be a personal question, not simply generic. When does anyone know they're called to be a priest? But my answer may speak to other priests' experiences. Let me say, first of all, that the priesthood is indeed a call, a vocation, as we say. This is different from a job or a career. Being a priest is not simply about what the priest does. It's about who he is. It is not about a 9-to-5, 40-hour-a-week occupation. What the priest does flows from who he is. A vocation is discerned in prayer because it is the Holy Spirit who knocks on a young man's heart, not the young man who knocks on the door of the seminary. So if the person who sent in the question wants to know about my personal experience, I began to feel a call to priesthood fairly early in my life. As a child, I fell in love with the idea of being a Mountie. This is a typical Canadian's dream. When my father, who was in the Canadian Air Force, was stationed in Port-au-Prairie, Manitoba, we moved in next door to a Mountie. I was in awe of that man whenever I saw him in his uniform. But around that same time, I got involved in our local parish. And by getting involved in some of the activities for youth in the parish, I got to know our parish priest and the priest who followed him as pastor. I found myself drawn to the life of a priest and dreamed less of joining the RCMP. I was about 14 at the time. Not one to do things by half measures, by the time I was 16, I had enrolled in a minor seminary, with my young heart fixed from that young age on being a priest. Many years and countless experiences followed that both challenged and affirmed this direction in my life. From time to time I had to wonder, is this really God's desire for me, or is it my own longing to do something significant and meaningful with my life? How do I know for sure that if it's God who is calling? I recall one priest telling me, the sure affirmation comes when the bishop ordains you a priest. I should point out that in the Catholic Church, there are two sorts of priests, if you will. A Catholic priest is never a free agent, as we call it in baseball. You are either a diocesan priest belonging to a local diocese, obedient to its bishop, and ministering basically in that diocese. Or you may belong to a religious order or congregation, like the Jesuits or Oblates or Franciscans. I became one of the latter, a Redemptorist priest. I lived a strong community life with other priests and brothers, obedient to my Redemptorist superiors more so than to a bishop. Only when I became a bishop did I step away from the Redemptorists in order to shepherd this archdiocese. Let me return to the question, when did I know I was being called to be a priest? Again, it was in my prayer that I first heard the call of God in my heart, but this had to be affirmed and encouraged through the many stages of what we call formation. The priests and seminary directors encouraged and affirmed that call in many ways. In my studies of philosophy and theology, and in my engagement in prayer and spiritual exercises, there was never a time when I felt I was not being called to be a priest. As that one priest told me, it was when a bishop ordained me as a priest in Toronto in May of 1977 that I felt the ultimate affirmation of God's call in my life. I then was a priest. I love listening to other priests or religious sisters tell their story of being called. I recall the show on TV called Biography. Their byline was, "Every life has a story." For the sake of brevity, I've left out much in my story, but this is how I know that God called me to be a priest.